Welcome to the 10th episode of Ancient History. As it will be out just in time for the Solstice and Christmas, I thought it proper to make it about the Saturnalia, the famous Roman celebrations that took place between the 17th and 23rd of December in the Julian calendar. It was, as we shall see, a festival of different dimensions and contained both public and private elements, and for some days allowed for a relaxation of the rigid social structures of Roman society. So without further ado, let's rejoice the Roman way. In the beginning, the celebrations, with its pastoral origin, was confined to one day, the 17th. But it evolved over time to a quite motley festival that spread out over almost an entire week. As the name reveals, the celebration was held to the god Saturn, among other aspects, the god of generations, dissolution, and liberation. Saturn was also an agricultural deity, ruling over the seasons and passage of time. He was said to have reigned in a golden era, now lost. As such, the festival became a celebration of Saturn's return as king of the world. The holiday was initiated with a sacrifice at the temple of Saturn on the Forum. Later in time followed a public banquet, followed by private gift-giving and frivolous partying, and a week of carnival atmosphere. Although very well known by its name, there are in fact no single source which describe the entirety of the Saturnalia. So whatever we know of the holiday, the different aspects are pieced together from different sources. Of the earliest manifestations we know less, but we know that the festivities underwent a significant reform in 217 BCE, after the Roman defeat at the Battle of Lake Trasimene in the Second Punic War. For some reason, after being a fully Roman festival, a decision was made, after consulting the Sibylline books, that the Greek form of rite with sacrifices should be adopted. The banquet was also added. From this time is also added the custom to shout "Io Saturnalia," that would be a characteristic of the holiday. At the beginning of the celebration, the statue of Saturn, who was usually bound by its feet, was freed as a symbolic act of liberation. A sacrifice was officiated by a bare-headed priest. As some of you may know, sacrifices were in Roman culture usually made with the head of the priest covered. This is why we see emperors in sacrificial sculptures always wearing a cloth over the head. There are many ways to interpret this unusual act, but one that we shall return to shortly is the reversal of normality. That was the predominant aspect of the Saturnalian feast. After this, an image of Saturn was placed on a seat or a couch in the Senate, to show that he was present and taking part of the festivities. This was mainly a Greek tradition that soon became Romanized. After this followed the public banquet. As far as we know, the 17th was a holiday freed from work. Schools were closed, the state functions, like the courts, were not in session. Even war was excused, as no declaration of war could be made during the festival. The following days, the non-public celebrations dominated. Also freed from work and duties, private and domestic rituals followed. They included bathing and perhaps sacrificing, especially a suckling pig that was the traditional offer to an earth deity. Despite the Greek influence on the ritual of sacrifice, offerings was probably of much older tradition, and in some mythological sources it is said that Saturnus had demanded human sacrifice, especially of men. This tradition had in any case died out already in the early ages. Instead, offerings of so-called effigies and oscilla were given, symbolizing the heads of the sacrificed victims. Nonetheless, there is, as late as in the 3rd century CE, records made of Saturn receiving dead gladiators as offerings during or in connection to the Saturnalia. The gladiatorial events were sponsored with funds from the treasury of Saturn. Hence, both the state and the people feasted during the Saturnalia. It was truly a feast for the Senate and people of Rome, that is, SPQR, the famous abbreviation for Senatus Populusque Romanus, the national coat of arms for Rome. But the celebration had many different aspects to it, and one of them is more famous than the others, and that is the tradition of role reversal, where the slaves could mock their masters and even the emperor for a day, within limits. The most distinctive feature of the Saturnalia was perhaps the tradition of role reversal that overturned the norms of society. Slaves were given banquets, although it is not confirmed if masters and slaves dined together or if the slaves dined and the masters served them. One could suspect that it differed from household to household. It seems, of course, as if overeating and massive drunkenness usually was a common problem. Slaves were also permitted to criticize and disrespect their masters. However, of course, everyone knew that this was just temporary. In a day or two, things would be back to normal. Better not to be too harsh, perhaps. The leveling was temporary, and freedom had its limits. As a sign of changed order, the toga was not worn during the festivities. Instead, men dressed in more relaxed clothing. During this time, the citizens also seem to have had a habit of wearing the pileus, a small cap that was usually put on a slave's head during the ceremony in which he was freed. This cap was also a symbol of freedom, as we saw, for example, during Brutus' resistance against Julius Caesar. It also seems that from the Republic and onwards, Roman women moved about more freely and even participated in the feasts that would usually have been reserved for men. There are even signs of role-playing between sexes and masquerades. Especially the 19th of December, called the Sigillaria, was a day of gift-giving. This tradition seems to have taken place at all stations in society, and seemed to have been a favorite festive element for Octavianus or Augustus. The gifts were usually quite simple and made up of things like pottery or wax figurines, the Sigillaria, that were made especially for the Saturnalia. Just as we, for an example, have certain kinds of gifts for Halloween or Easter. Gag gifts were Augustus' speciality. Writing tablets, knuckle bones, money purses, beauty articles, small attires, utensils, perfumes, statues, masks, books, and so forth. It is hard not to see similarities to our celebrations around the time for winter solstice. One frequent gift seemed to have been dice, which brings us to another element of the Saturnalia: gambling. Gambling was usually frowned upon in Rome, sometimes even forbidden. But at the Saturnalia, games were allowed, even for slaves to be able to gamble with their masters, the stakes being money or some other token. Lastly, from imperial times, there seemed to have been appointed a Saturnalicius princeps. He was a kind of satiric figure made in contrast to the princeps. He could give commands that had to be obeyed, like "throw the man into water," or "you there, take off your clothes and sing." His role as alternative ruler eventually became so apparent that during Domitianus' time it was attested that after all the emperor, just like Jupiter, still reigned during the temporary return of Saturn. The Principate was always the ruling institution of the world. All this because the Saturnalia, after all, criticized a world in which only one human ruled, an ever-sore point for every emperor. A more devotional way of celebration was the tradition of lighting wax candles. The original meaning of this habit is not fully known, as the festivities, in accordance with Saturn's connection to the solstice, had different meanings both astrologically, astronomically, and culturally. But it is not so far-fetched, perhaps, to see it as a celebration of the returning light, as the Earth in its orbit had now passed its darkest point. We end with the words of Seneca. It is now the month of December, where the greatest part of the city is in a bustle. Loose reins are given to public dissipation. Everywhere you may hear the sound of great preparations, as if there were some real differences between the days devoted to Saturn and those for transacting business. Were you here, I would willingly confer with you as to the plan of our conduct, whether we should eat in our usual way, or, to avoid singularity, both take a better supper and to throw off the toga. As I mentioned in the prologue, this was the 10th episode of Ancient History, and I thank all of you lovely viewers out there for your support so far. We will continue in 2022 with many more documentaries. I will not reveal anything just yet, but there will be 2 series starting in the beginning of next year, and of course many other fascinating subjects. EU Saturnalia, everyone! If you like this short documentary, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you would like to help me to make even better documentaries about the past in the future, consider joining me at Patreon. I have put a link to my site in the description below. Have a fantastic Yuletid, everyone.